Today I'm going to be going over the broad steps to thread a barrel and some considerations that you're going to want to take. This is my Remington 700 hunting rifle. My deer season is over with, and I want to thread the barrel 5/8 24 by 0.55 in order to twist on a ASR muzzle brake. So first thing we're going to want to do is make sure that we have enough barrel to achieve what we're looking for. So 5/8 as a decimal is 0.625, and I have 0.672. So that'll leave us approximately 50 thousandths over what we need, and we are going to need more than just 5/8 because we need a shoulder on both sides. So whatever you're screwing on stops against that shoulder. Next thing we're going to want to do is measure our barrel and make sure that our barrel is going to fit in our lathe without having to remove it from the receiver. So I know that that barrel is 23 inches long from the muzzle to where it butts up against the receiver. This Grizzly lathe can only accommodate through the tailstock up to the chuck 22 inches or less. Will just not, you won't have enough sticking out of the lathe in order to thread it without pulling it from the receiver. So see, we got 22 inches from the spider to our chuck, and we've got 23-inch barrel, so that gives us a whole inch sticking out for us to thread. If we had less than 22, instead of using our spider to hold the rear end of the action, what we would have to do is use our chuck and our live center. But we got enough, so that's going to take some work off of our plate. All right, I've gone ahead and removed our action from our stock, and I've removed the scope. We can go ahead and leave the trigger because it's not really going to be bothering anything. Our next step is we're going to tape the majority of our barrel off, so once we put it in the lathe, if anything's bouncing around in there, it's not going to scratch our barrel. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to run a bore brush down our bore, because we're going to be indicating off of the inside of the bore, and if the inside of the bore has a bunch of carbon or anything in there just generally clogging it up, you're going to get a false reading and your indication is going to be off, which means that your barrel is not going to be concentric when it spins inside the lathe. All right, we've taped it off, so let's go ahead and run a brush down it. One more time. And go ahead and blow it out. Okay, now we're going to get started with indicating everything in and put our barrel into our lathe. Okay, snug this up. Just snug up the back, and as far as the front goes, all we're doing with this is kind of using our live center just to kind of hold it in place, because this will be roughly concentric around here. All right, now we're going to rough in the front. Where the jaws are going to be touching the barrel, we're going to use shims in between. These are small aluminum shims. That way we don't gouge up our barrel with the jaws of the chuck. Now our front is roughed in. We're not tightening these down at all. They're literally just touching the aluminum shims. It's going to hold them in place. We're going to indicate in the back and then the front. All right, now we're going to indicate in our spider end of the barrel. So what we're going to be doing is tightening up these bolts and loosening them up in order that we can have a perfectly concentric barrel when it spins. Now if you look at the dial indicator, that arm is just going up and down all around as soon as we start spinning the barrel. So what we're going to do is get it to where that needle doesn't move, maybe barely, but that's just going to be for on account of the barrel itself not being perfectly concentric. All right, so we've indicated in the spider end of our barrel, and if we can see, our needle isn't moving hardly at all. It's within 1/4 of a thousandth, 1/10 of a thousandth, something like that. But whenever you're adjusting it to indicate it in, you need to go from one axis at a time. So because our needle is going in from the side, we want to adjust our side bolt to get our indication this way. So either tighten this one or loosen it, and then do the opposite to the other side. All right, now it's time to indicate in our front. Now, if you can see as I'm turning it, it's jumping up and down, up and down. What that is the lands and grooves. As it hits those lands, it jumps up, and as it hits a groove, it dips down. So what we're going to want is to see the same jump every single time. So if it's between 10 and 15, we want to see 10, 15, 10, 15, every axis that we are indicating it in with. All right, we've indicated in our front. So if we watch our needle, 11, 15, 11, 15, 11, 15, 11, 15. So on an entire rotation, we keep it in the same two numbers for our lands and our grooves. We are nice and concentric. Now we're just going to test it with a range rod just so we can get a visual indicator of that. Yeah. Let's get it. All right. We've indicated in our front. Let's go ahead and see how it looks. We are set on B2, which is 360 RPM. Yep. Nice and concentric, no wobble. Now we're just going to get everything marked up and scribe our line and turn it down to 5/8. All right. Now I've got a crow's foot marked at 0.55. That's going to be the length of our threads for our ASR brake. Now I'm just going to do our first scribe. I've got a few thousandths backed off. There we go. And now we have our stop line. So we know where to stop once we start turning everything down. All right, now if you can see, I've got 0.689 as far as the thickness of my barrel goes. And we're trying to get to 0.625, which is 5/8. So let's get started. I've got our everything zeroed out. Back it off one turn. Get in front of our muzzle. Back to 0. Now we are going to say, let's take 10 thousandths. Hit it with a little bit of cutting oil. Okay, we hit our stop line. After our first rough cut, took 10 thousandths off. Now we're at about 670. It's kind of difficult to get in through here like this, but we're at about 0.663, which means we need to take off about 40 thousandths. All right, I'm going to get to turning this down and be back in a second. If you can see all the shards flying everywhere, safety first, safety last, safety always. Wear glasses. Alright, smooth off any imperfections with a file. Make sure you hold it like this in case it grabs something, it doesn't go stabbing in your face. Okay, now we're sitting at 0.625, which is 5/8, but we like double redundancy, so we're going to check it with a analog dial indicator. And we're at 626 on our analog, so we're just going to go ahead and take a couple more thousandths off. Alright, we're at our target of 623. I always like to go a couple thousandths under, just to make sure that if there's any, discrepancies between your measuring equipment, that you're still going to be underneath that 0.625. Now we're going to cut our shoulder. If you can see here, the shoulder of the barrel is, it's tapered. It's kind of rounded and wobbly. Now the reason for that is one, because of the bit we're using, and two, because we're not using a precise measurement of turning it down. But we've changed our bit to a different bit, and what we're going to do is push it forward and then draw it back to create us a nice square shoulder for that muzzle device to butt up against. Alright, now I've got my zeros set, so once I get to 0, it's going to touch. Alright, now we're just going to move it in until we get rid of all that rounded off material. Now draw it back. Okay, that is a nice square shoulder. It's not much of one. We only really got about 25 thousandths on each side, but that is enough to stop our muzzle device. We've changed out our bit to our thread cutting bit. Now we're just going to check it for square, making sure that our muzzle is in line with our bit, and these hash marks on this scale are going to tell me whether I'm squared or not, and we are. Alright, now I'm going to set my zeros by moving in our bit until it just touches. Which is right there. We can see that line. And it's just touching. So we're going to set our 0. And get ready to cut threads. Alright, now we're going to use a thread pitch gauge and check it against our scored lines to make sure that we've got 5/8 24. Better be safe than sorry. All right, we've got our thread pitch gauge. Each of these individual teeth, just line them up with your lines. Yep, and it's 24 threads per inch. We're good to go. Now we're just going to take about 6 thousandths worth of material every single pass, and after approximately 40 thousandths has been taken off, our threads will just be cut, and they'll be a little rough, and then we'll clean them up. All right, let's get started. All right, we're going to do our last pass and then clean it up with a thread file. After this pass, we're going to just touch up the threads just a little bit with a thread file, and then we're going to test fit our muzzle device. Now let's see if it'll start to thread. If so, oh yeah. All right, so it's not, it'll start off, but then we get tight, so we're gonna go ahead and take a couple thousandths more. All right, so we've got it to where it's a nice firm fit. So we're gonna hit it with a reamer now. All right, I said I'm gonna hit it with a reamer. What I meant was I'm gonna hit it with a die. There's a 5/8 24 die, and all this is gonna do is clean up any rough edges that might exist in our threads. And if you're good at it, it won't really take off any material, which means you got really, really close to the standard. All right, look at that. All right, let's see what she do. Perfect. All right. Now all we have left to do is to touch up the tip of our muzzle, because it'll be a little wobbly because of where the threads start. All right, we've bumped our threads back up to 360 RPM, or bumped our speed back up to 360 RPM, and then we're going to clean up this space. Let me show you why. Yeah, it kind of wobbles like that. That's natural. That's just because of where the threads start. So we're going to use a file, holding it properly so we don't stab ourselves in the wrist if it catches, but just giving it a slight cant, and that's just going to clean up the very tip of our muzzle so it looks nice and even and concentric. All right, now we just pull it out and throw it in our stock and put our scope back on. All right, we pulled it out. You can see how we got a little bit of brass from the tip of the bolts that are in the spider, and we've got a little bit of aluminum residue from where we clamped it down, so just steel wire brush. Comes right off. Same thing with the brass. All right, looks good. We're ready to rock and roll. And that is how you thread the barrel of a rifle in a lathe. Now, I've left out a bunch of specifics. Those are just the broad steps that you need to do. Yeah, learn machining. Very cool.